morning. So this morning I'm going to talk about kind of tips and tricks to making really fantastic sourdough. So I'll go through different bits of the process from start to finish, and I'll kind of focus on certain areas that are really important to making beautiful sourdough. So first tip really is your starter. Like, start off with a really good starter. So the ratio you want is to have 1-6-6 or 1-5-5, somewhere around about there, which means you've got, as an example, would be 10 grams of your starter, 50 grams of flour, and 50 grams of water. So that's kind of a 1-5-5 or 1-6-6, where you've got 10 grams of starter, 60 grams of flour, 60 grams of water, and leave that overnight. And in the morning you'll have a really beautiful bubbly starter. And I always put an elastic band on mine, and that kind of tells you that you want at least a doubling and a bit more. Probably here I've got like 1.5 times the rise on here, so I know that's a really good starter. Now I use rye flour. For me that gives me a lovely flavour, but more than that, probably gives me a really good bubbly starter, very reactive, easy to use. So that's what I use, but I will mix it around every now and again. I'll find other organic flours to use as well, just to kind of build up that base for your starter. So there you go, tip number one, really important, 1-5-5 or 1-6-6 starter overnight, ready for baking the next day. And so from here I'm going to say use 120 grams of this, or 110 grams of this, so there'll be a little left over in the jar, which is your 10 grams for your next starter. So you can keep on using this throughout the week. So there you go. So tip number one. Right, so here we go. So tip number two now, which I think is equally as important as tip number one, really, as far as getting a loaf that's beautiful, lovely and light, and full of flavour and healthy and nutritious, which is what we're making our own bread for, to be, to live a life having beautiful, healthy bread and tasty. So find a flour supplier, maybe locally, that kind of has heritage grain or mills their own flour, and find out a bit about the flours, and then choose some that look good, test them out. If you can, go organic. This is an organic extra coarse wholemeal flour, really lovely. You probably wouldn't want to have 100% of that in your loaf because it probably would make it quite dense, but you can still do it. Just needs a little bit more kind of tweaking of the recipes to do that. So things like, wholemeal spelt flours are great as well. Again, shipped to a mill. I use shipped to a mill a lot. And if you are a baker and you're baking bread on a weekly basis, then go out there and buy it in bulk. You'll find buying 10 kilograms of mixed different flours will be far cheaper than buying supermarket bread, and you're getting organic flour as well. So really do your research, test them out. Once you're happy you've got a selection you like, get them in bulk, get them in quantity, and you're going to have great breads. And get a variety, get some, say, organic dark rye flour as well to play around with, and as well as like a really good base of a good sourdough organic bread flour, like a white flour. So that's really important. And you never stop learning about flours. You find different ones to try and use, and it makes life really exciting because you get different breads to enjoy. So tip number two, really good flour, look around, do your research, and buy in quantity if you can, and your life will be much better, and you'll be making bread for a really, really good price, which is fantastic for all of us. There you go, tip number two. Right, the next tip and trick really here is, if you want to get a really light aerated bread when you've got maybe more whole grains in there, a kind of a tip really is to kind of use a process called Bassinage, where you're adding more water into your mix as you go. So at the moment, this is about 70% hydrated, so it's quite a kind of stiff mix. And this, we know, feeling this here, this can take a lot more water. So I'm going to go from 70% to 80%. So this is after I've added in the starter and salt to it, and it's going to have been absorbing the water. But I can feel from here it can take a lot more. So I'm going to add in enough water to get up to 80%. So I'll add that in here, and then we mix it through on there. So we move on there. So this really is kind of, you've got to start to work the dough now to get that. If you've got a mixer, kind of this, I guess, helps a little bit in this side of the process to get this in. It's going to take a little while to kind of break it down there again to get more water in. But this means you're going to get a much lighter, more aerated dough once all that's got into the bread. So I'll go through and knead that through, and I'll kind of check back in again in a couple of minutes, and you can see what it's like then. So the process here is when you're adding in the extra water, you kind of want to get some strength into it and get it all absorbed. So you're kind of doing a technique where you pull it up and you stretch it and move it around. So adding in dough strength as you're incorporating the water. And already it's gone from being like a real sticky mess to being, you know, not a bad ball of dough to think about. Stretching and folding in half an hour's time. So do that for a bit longer and it'll start to get a little bit firmer the more you do this. And you're adding in dough strength and the hydration. So we'll come back to this in a few minutes. Right, I think this is tip number 5 or 6, I forget now. Anyway, we'll call it tip number 6, or just the next tip. So when you've got quite a high hydration, 80% dough like this, you really got to kind of put a little bit of work into it. So this is going to go for its first stretch and fold now. So I'm going to be quite aggressive with it now. I'm going to kind of always wet your hands. This is the most important thing as well. It's kind of a sub tip here. Wet your hands. Whenever you touch dough, then you've got a window then where it will not stick. So this technique here, I'm going to release it from the bowl and I'm going to go through and I'm going to stretch it on my hand like this. And it doesn't stick because I've got wet hands. So I've got a limited time then when it's actually going to work for me. And you feel already the ball of dough getting quite tight, and that's really what you want. And if you want to, it's not going to hurt to do it again. So wet your hands again and go through it again. Again, this is because the reason we're doing this again is because this is a very high hydration dough, and so you need to kind of put some work into it to actually build up the gluten content, well not gluten content, but build up the gluten strength in the dough. So now we can see how tight it is now here. So I'll give it another little fold over. Again, you can't ever do this. So this is, if you're working with a lower hydration like 70%, you haven't got to go to this length really of kind of getting the strength in there to this degree. But there you go. So that looks now about. So I'm happy now. You'll see you kind of slowly relax, and we're going to do this probably a couple more times. And then the Bassinage procedures basically work for us. We've kind of got extra water in there, extra hydration, which means we should then get a much more aerated crumb on our bake. So there you go. I'll get on to the next tip in a minute. Right, next tip and trick really on here is that if you like a slightly softer loaf, like some people will find sourdough loaves, you know, a bit too crunchy for them, for their teeth or whatever, or you just fancy a change, just like a more of a sandwich soft loaf, you can easily achieve that. So really what you're doing here is just introducing some oil. So I like to kind of use olive oil here. It's just an extra virgin olive oil. And you're not going to put much in, just enough there to give it a kind of a little bit of a softer texture. So just wet your hands and then just dimple in the bread, sorry, the dough slightly like this. And you're going to give it just a sprinkle really of the olive oil across here. So probably like, you know, well, what's that? Tablespoon and a half, and you could go a bit more, play around with it, see what you think. Then just kind of dimple that olive oil into the dough. So this is just kind of a way of mixing it in really for you, so it kind of gets into the centre of the dough a little bit more quickly than we do normally. So just going to go around to that's kind of still kind of until it's kind of the pools of it have just kind of gone into the dough, and just scrape it around from the outside here. That's looking pretty good actually now on here. And then you're just going to tuck that through now. So you're going to go through and just going to tuck that over here like this. And the same over here. And then again this way. That's great. And there. So you've got kind of a ball of dough. Then just turn it over. And then other side up. And then I'm just going to kind of gently then kind of just stretch it through like this. This means you've really got a good mixture. So you're kind of doing a stretch and fold at the same time here. You're doing two things. But you're doing this at the stage now when you've already got some dough strength in your dough. So this is looking already, I'll show you in a minute what I mean by dough strength on here. So a really good test is to do the window pane test. Right, so that's great. So that's just started probably to move that through, and that will absorb now through the dough. And you can see now you've got a nice tight ball of dough again there, even though the oil's moved through. So that's the tip. So I'll come back in a second and give you another tip, which is a really crucial one. Right, here's the next tip. This is really how you can test and check that you've got good dough strength in your dough. So it's like a window pane test. You've probably seen this before, but doing it and doing it regularly, because it gives you an idea of how your dough is developing. So first of all, again, wet your hands. And you want to kind of catch a corner of the dough here and just kind of gently pull it and see how translucent it is on there. As you can see on here, that's really quite good now. You're kind of getting a nice window pane effect. I mean, it will tear sometimes, so you can see already on there that that's actually looking really good. But I'll show you again on another piece of the dough. So just on here, again, you're kind of getting a nice window pane effect. So this is quite a whole grain mix I got here. So you're never going to get it completely see through, but you can see how good that is. There's a good texture to it and a good window pane. So now we know that's looking to be at a good stage. So check your dough through the process when you've done stretch and folds, and just see what your dough strength is like. I mean, this here is looking really good. This is a high hydration dough, so I know it's had a really good stretch and fold and a really good workout to get to this point. And you can't ever really overdo it. So when you're starting off, handling your dough and touching and feeling it's going to give you a good idea of what's going on for your dough and where you're at in the process. So there you go. There's a tip for you. Right, one more tip and trick, I guess, is just to see when you're happy that the proofing time is finished. So you're ready to kind of go into the fridge. So this is kind of like a prod test. So you want to kind of wet your finger and just see what the spring back is on here with a wet finger. So see the indent is slowly coming back. So this probably is right on the border now of being just about ready. If it springs back immediately, it needs a bit longer. This has had about 4 hours now since the last stretch and fold. So that kind of feels to me as though there's still spring in there, and it's coming back kind of slowly. Eventually those kind of marks will disappear in there. So that looks to me about perfect now to shape and to get ready for the fridge. So that's the test. I mean, also you can have a look underneath as well and see there's quite a good aeration as well, coming through, lots of bubbles appearing on the bottom here, a little bit of blistering on top here you can see. So fermentation is going well. So that to me looks like a really good rise. So yeah, just see that kind of slowly coming back here, and eventually that will kind of disappear. If you sunk your finger in there and the indent just stayed there, unfortunately you've got to overproof then. So that's going to be, still use it, but you're going to have a flatter loaf. This to me looks about perfect. So that's great. So that's the tip and trick there. Use the finger prod test, have a feel for it. Should be some kind of resistance coming back on you, and that's great. So I'll give you another tip and trick in a wee while. Okay, great. So another tip here is when you're going to do your shaping and you're going to put your dough into the balancer, use rice flour. So I kind of put it in this little sprinkler here. So if you're working the top here, just a little bit on the top like this, just to kind of help it not to stick too much, and then also give your balancer a really good dust over. So give it a liberal amount, and always use rice flour. Don't use bread flour. It has to be rice flour, otherwise it will stick. So there we go, a nice kind of snowy white coating, and that's going to be great now. So once the dough goes in here, it's not going to stick. And when you're shaping on here as well, it means you're going to have a nice surface it's not going to stick to. So rice flour is what you want, not normal flour, or not wheat flour I should say. So while I'm here, I'm just taking you through I did quite a quick shaping on here because I know the dough is really good. I really don't want to work too hard on the shaping of this one. So spread out a few nuts and seeds on here. You can see that there or not. And then tip out your dough. Always wet hands first of all when you're doing this. So you can see already this is really lovely now, really light, and beautiful to work with. And so just going to stretch this out like that, and over here, Yeah, like that. Into the seeds. And into the basket. So another tip on here really is when you've put this in the balance on there, just go around and give it a little bit of a rice flour on the sides here, tip it up from here. See a little bit of sticking going on there. So what you want to do there, just pull it away, and just put a little bit of rice flour down. This is quite a high hydration dough, so you've got to be really careful here with this, that we get it on the money. There you go. So this is really going to help it to stop sticking as it expands, and that's great. So I'm happy that's proved really well. So I'm basically going to put a cover on that and put it straight in the fridge now from there. Great. Well, the last tip really on here is when you're using a Dutch oven is to use ice cubes. I use 3 ice cubes in my Dutch oven there, so that gives the ability to get steam in there and stops the crust or the top of the dough from kind of sealing over before it's got a chance to rise. So steam's really important in the Dutch oven for about 15 minutes or so. Now I put on 20 minutes so it goes in there with the lid on there, but that's what you anyway. I'll show you now what I'm going to do. So here's my beautiful loaf from last night, from being in the fridge. So a little dusting of semolina flour on there. Loaf in. And then a really nice slash across the top here. Nice simple slash like that. Literally gone all the way through to the edges here. It's looking good. Because you really want this to be a nice clean break on there. So there you go, looking good. And then ice cubes in. And as fast as you can, lid on. Those will allow some steam coming through into here. Stop it from sealing over, and in the oven now. So I put that in the oven for 20 minutes, and it's at 240 right now, it's quite a high temperature, and then the 20 minutes after that at about 210, 220. So there you go. Ice cubes create steam, that's the tip. Enjoy. Okay, it's great. So let's just pull out a loaf from the oven to show you what it looks like after using all those tips and tricks to get a really good loaf. So this is loaf, hopefully you know what you guys will end up with as well from the oven. So there you go, beautiful loaf. Lovely crumb on there. That's the aerated on there. Really like that. That'll be a beautiful loaf. So it's spun out to a nice size. So because of the high or higher hydration, like 80%, it's really puffed up nicely and it's got a nice height to it. And lovely crumbs. So I'm sure that's going to be absolutely beautiful loaf. So yeah, so please, you know, have a play around with the tips and tricks I've gone through today, and then, you know, you'll end up with a beautiful loaf. I mean, it's well worth the effort to kind of put something together there. There you go. So enjoy.